So I did this live earlier, if you caught it, and it just didn't upload properly. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties. So I'm going to ask you to please hit your thumbs up button and please share. Check to see if you're still subscribed, if you are a subscriber. And if you're not a subscriber, please think about subscribing. And if you'd like to have your notification bell ring, that is good for finding out when I just drop a live like I am right now. So I'm going to repeat what I went through earlier. So if you were here then, I appreciate you very much. And if you're going to sit through it again, you rock, because this is roughly a 20-page proclamation from the Governor Green of Hawaii, and I am taking it off of a post from Hawaii Real Estate yesterday. He put up a community post that I shared, and in his community post, he has the link for the proclamation. And everything I say is simply my opinion, simply for the sake of conversation. I'm always hoping to open up a discussion, hoping to learn something. All my videos are made specifically for YouTube, and that's an entertainment platform. So I want to just jump right into it and power through it. And thank you if you're here and listening. If you're not, I don't blame you. But I do think it's really important that we all pay attention to these documents, because something's going on over there in Maui, you guys, and it is frightening. Regardless of how these fires started, I mean, if these fires were intentional, of course, that's a whole nother nightmare, right? Let's just say they were a cluster of accidents. That's still a freaking nightmare. And things are really sketchy. So here's the proclamation. The heading is Office of the Governor, State of Hawaii, 7th proclamation relating to wildfires. By the authority vested in me by the Constitution and laws of the State of Hawaii, in order to provide relief for disaster damages, losses, and suffering, and to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the people, I, Josh Green, MD, Governor of the State of Hawaii, hereby determine, designate, and proclaim as follows. So I'm going to read through this as much as I can without interrupting, but I am going to try to put a little bit of interesting stuff in there so it's not so dry. And just starting, obviously today is 9/11, and what a heartbreak that was 22 years ago. And this past weekend was the first weekend that my family and I did not participate in a 9/11 memorial fundraising stair climb to help the families of the fallen heroes. But the reason that we didn't was because our oldest son was graduating from boot camp. So that was a good enough reason to miss it. But I really enjoy doing these 9/11 stair climbs. I'm just there as a support person. The stairs are too rough on my knees. But anyway, let's go ahead with the whereas. On August 8th, 2023, Acting Governor Sylvia Luke issued the proclamation relating to wildfires and declared a state of emergency to exist in the counties of Maui and Hawaii. Whereas on August 9th, 2023, after wildfires spread considerably and burned a number of structures in and around Lahaina, Acting Governor Sylvia Luke issued a second proclamation relating to wildfires, which extended the emergency declaration to the entire state. Oh, you guys are here. You rock. Thank you for visiting, and I hope it's not too painful. I'm going to do my best to not lose my place. Whereas also on August 9th, 2023, Acting Governor Sylvia Luke issued the third proclamation relating to wildfires. Whereas on August 10th, 2023, I issued the fourth proclamation relating to wildfires. Whereas on August 13th, 2023, I issued the fifth proclamation relating to wildfires. Whereas on August 19th, 2023, I issued the sixth proclamation relating to wildfires. Whereas these fires have burned thousands of acres cut off communications and forced closure of roads and schools and evacuations in the Kahalo, Kahala Ranch and Kula areas. Whereas the fires have caused significant loss of life and property in Maui County, thousands of people are without adequate shelter, and the town of Lahaina has been destroyed. Whereas it is necessary to supplement the sixth proclamation to ensure a continued and effective statewide response to the wildfire emergency. And thanks, Lisa, Max, Sandra, and Elsie. I hope that I can keep your attention. Whereas the legislature of the state of Hawaii has appropriated from the general revenues of the state monies as may be necessary for expenditure by or under the direction of the governor for the immediate relief of the conditions created by the emergency. So it's a very dry document, but I think it's going to be worthwhile. I think that we all need to know the things that are said in here because this is one of our states and this affects all of us, in my opinion. Actually, this affects all of us worldwide, in my opinion, but especially in the United States of America. Whereas in expending such monies, the governor may allot any portion to any agency, office, or employee of the state, or to any county for the most expeditious and efficient relief of the conditions created by the emergency. Whereas pursuant to the sections 127A 14 and 127A 16 Hawaii Revised Statutes, HRS, and the governor may determine whether an emergency or disaster has occurred and whether there is an imminent danger or threat of an emergency or disaster and authorize actions under Chapter 127A HRS and the expenditure of funds thereafter. Hello, hello, Mark and Sandra. Whereas pursuant to the section 127A 13A 3 HRS, the governor may suspend any law that impedes or tends to impede or is detrimental to the expeditious and efficient execution of or that conflicts with emergency functions, including laws specifically made applicable to emergency personnel. Whereas pursuant to Section 127A 13A2 HRS, the governor may relieve hardships and inequities or obstructions to the public health, safety, and welfare found by the governor to exist in the laws and to result from the operation of federal programs or measures taken under Chapter 127A HRS by suspending laws in whole or in part, or by alleviating the provisions of laws on such terms and conditions as the governor may impose. Hey, Jaded Warehouse. Nice to see you. Whereas Section 127A HRS provides immunity from civil liability for certain entities and individuals while engaging in emergency management functions, including volunteers whose services are accepted by authorized persons, except in cases of willful misconduct, gross negligence, or recklessness, and now therefore I, Josh Green, MD, Governor of the State of Hawaii, hereby determine that an emergency or disaster contemplated by Section 127A 14 HRS is occurring in the state of Hawaii, and I do hereby authorize and invoke the following emergency provisions, which are expressly invoked, if not already in effect upon declaration of an emergency. Please hit that like button if you'd be so kind. I'll grab my creepy thumb. Helps the algorithm, and I think this information needs to get out there if it's not going to kill people with boredom. I will try to make it a little bit interesting, just with a laugh and a smile, but this is such devastating, disastrous. It's unthinkable. Absolutely unthinkable. Okay. So here we are. 1, essential travel only to West Maui through October 7th, 2023. You guys know that Starkey Homestead, she just arrived. So Essential travel only. That this was the 8th. This was Friday that this was signed. So she just got in by the skin of her teeth. Non-essential travel to West Maui is strongly discouraged through October 7th, 2023. This guidance will be discontinued October 8th, 2023. I order all affected state agencies to assist as needed. 2, invocation of laws. This is so devastating for the economy there, you guys. Obviously, this whole thing is so devastating on so many levels. It's just unbelievable. Let me just add here, I live in Ohio, and I have a friend of a friend who is living in the disaster zone from Ohio, and she had been living there and was there the day of the fires. Her and her friends were in a car trying to get away from the fires. They were stuck in their car. They got out of their car. They survived. She came home several weeks later to see her family in Ohio. She's in her 20s. She died in her sleep, you guys. And I can't confirm or deny that it was a result of whatever toxic exposure or stress or anything else from the fires there in Lahaina, but it seems pretty likely in her 20s. In her 20s. So she died over the weekend. It's unbelievable. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that, just like we've seen that with 9/11 and the Twin Towers, and people are still suffering. Okay. Invocation of laws. Section 12130 HRS. I hereby authorize the Adjunct General to activate such units of the Hawaii National Guard as may be necessary to assist and aid civilian authorities in disaster and relief and in averting any imminent public danger and threat, and to ensure the compliance with the civil laws of the state of Hawaii. Sections 127A12 and 127A13 HRS, in order for county and state agencies to provide emergency relief and engage in emergency management functions as defined in Section 127A2 HRS as a result of and in response to this event. Section 127A13 A1 HRS, and determine that disaster-generated debris on private property in impacted areas constitute an immediate threat to life, public health, and safety, and to the economic recovery of the community at large. I agree with all of this, of course. Sections 127A13, A8, 127A25, and 127A29 HRS. I hereby order that making any unsolicited offer to an owner of real property located in the areas encompassed by United States postal zip codes 96761, 96767, and 96790 on the island of Maui to purchase or otherwise acquire any interest in the real property is prohibited. I further prescribe and adopt this order as a rule having the force and effect of law under Section 127A25. Any person who intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly makes an unsolicited offer to an owner of real property located in the areas encompassed by United States postal zip codes 96761, 96767, and 96790 on the island of Maui to purchase or otherwise acquire any interest in the real property shall be guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction, the person shall be fined no more than $5,000, imprisoned no more than 1 year, or both. The foregoing notwithstanding, it shall be an affirmative defense to prosecution if the property owner to whom the offer was made was not impacted by this wildfire emergency. For the purpose of this order, person means any individual, partnership, corporation, limited liability company, association, or other group or entity, however organized. Unsolicited means not asked for or requested. Now, this seems like it's designed to protect the people, maybe, but I'm thinking that it's designed to have the state do a big land grab. just my opinion. Sections 127A3, 127A12, A5, 127A13, A5, 127A13, A6, HRS, and the Director of Hawaii Emergency Management and the Administrator of Emergency Management are directed to take appropriate actions to direct or control as may be necessary for emergency management. I got to keep up with my water, having already read this whole thing out loud to you guys earlier. Okay, A, alerts, warnings, notifications, and activations. B, warnings and signals for alerts and any type or warning device, system, or method to be used in connection therewith. C, partial or full mobilization of state personnel in advance of or in response to an actual emergency or disaster. D, the conduct of civilians and the movement and cessation of movement of pedestrians and vehicular traffic during, before, and after alerts, emergencies, or disasters. E, shut off water mains, gas mains, electric power connections, or suspension of other services. And F, mandatory evacuations of the civil population. Almost seems like they're trying to make up for things that weren't done. Section 127A12B13 HRS requiring each public utility or any person owning, controlling, or operating a critical infrastructure to protect and safeguard its or the person's property, or to provide for the protection and safeguarding thereof, and provide for the protection and safeguarding of all critical infrastructure and key resources, provided that without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing two clauses, the protecting or safeguarding may include the regulation or prohibition of public entry thereon, or the permission of the entry upon terms and conditions as I may prescribe. Harshally, sorry. You're just as important, for sure. Temporary governor made an emergency law. Yeah, it's all crazy. Temporary governor and the regular governor. Okay. Section 12712B 16 HRS directing all state agencies and officers to cooperate and extend their services, materials, and facilities as may be required to assist in emergency response efforts. Section 127A16 HRS by activating the Major Disaster Fund. Section 127A30 HRS rental or sale of essential commodities during a state of emergency, prohibition against price increases. For the island of Maui, I hereby invoke the prohibition against price increases only for the following essential commodities. 1, food. 2, water. 3, dairy and non-dairy milk. 4, ice. 5, essential childcare products, including diapers, wipes, and infant formula. 6, over-the-counter medicines, including non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and first aid and wound care products. 7, hygiene products, including toothpaste, feminine hygiene products, hand soap and sanitizer, tissue, toilet paper, and face masks. 8, durable medical equipment, including wheelchairs, crutches, and walkers. 9, liquefied petroleum gas products, including propane and butane. 10, sales and rentals of motor vehicles. 11, repair of motor vehicles as defined in section 437B1 HRS. 12, rentals for the purpose of storing personal property in a self-service storage facility as defined in Part 3, Chapter 507 HRS. 13, pet food and pet supplies. And 14, rentals of residential dwellings. Prices for these essential commodities may not exceed regular prices that were in effect as of August 9th, 2023, when Section 127A30 was invoked in the second proclamation relating to wildfires, We all remember the first proclamation was made July 17th, right? Unless authorized by law or this proclamation, any additional operating expenses incurred by the seller or landlord and which can be documented may be passed on to the consumer or tenant. In the case of a residential dwelling unit, if rent increases are contained in a written instrument that was signed by the tenant prior to August 9th, 2023, the increases may take place pursuant to the written instrument. For the island of Maui, this prohibition against certain price increases shall be effective for the entire duration of this seventh proclamation relating to wildfires. So, can you pin me? I don't know that I can. It's so hard on the cell phone, and I'm doing this on my cell phone, reading on my laptop. Very weird how everything needs to be provided, approved by them. It's like a Nazi state as far as I'm concerned. Wait till you hear the rest of it. We're just getting warmed up. Section 201B9 HRS. Upon the request of the Board of the Hawaii Tourism Authority, I hereby declare that a tourism emergency exists in the state. I further authorized the Hawaii Tourism Authority, in coordination with the Department of Budget and Finance, to use monies in the Tourism Emergency Special Fund to respond to the emergency and provide relief under Section 201B10 HRS. So, and remember, the state of Hawaii was due to pay out to the tune of $328 million to Lahaina natives or Hawaiian natives. So that was due right now, September of 2023, the lawsuits that had been going on for 24 years. Okay. Suspension. Okay, rules relating to immunities for healthcare practices as set forth in Exhibit A. 3, suspension of laws. And if you're wanting to follow along with me, I'm at the bottom of page 5 of this latest proclamation that was signed September 8th, and you can find a copy of it in Eric West's community post, like I think it's like 3 back. It's from about 23 hours ago, and his channel is called Hawaii Real Estate. So, suspension of laws. The following specific provisions of laws are suspended as allowed by federal law pursuant to 127A 12B8 and 127A 13A3 HRS, to the extent that the law impedes or tends to impede or be detrimental to the expeditious and efficient execution of or to conflict with emergency functions, including laws by which this chapter specifically are made applicable to emergency personnel. Chapter 6E HRS, Historic Preservation, only to the extent necessary to allow for emergency demolition and removal of wildfire-generated debris. Any work performed under this limited suspension shall be subject to cultural, historic, and archaeological monitoring as appropriate. I also order state agencies and personnel, to the extent allowed by law and in consultation with the State Historic Preservation Division, to protect and preserve items of historic or cultural significance to the town and historic character of Lahaina, regardless of age, including but not limited to business signs and other landmarks. Section 37-41 HRS. Appropriations to revert to state treasury exceptions to the extent that appropriations lapse at the end of the fiscal year prior to completion of the emergency actions. Section 3774D HRS, program execution except for subsections 3774D2 and 3774D3 HRS. And any such transfers or changes considered to be authorized transfers or changes for purposes of Section 3474D1 for legislative reporting requirements. To the extent that legislative authorization would likely delay appropriation transfers or changes between programs to provide necessary funding to complete the emergency actions. I can talk, really. One sec. I stumbled over emergency. That's a word that I know quite well. Okay, excuse me. Section 4066 HRS, lapsing of appropriations. To the extent that the timing of the procurement of the construction of the emergency permanent repairs may occur the fiscal year following the original emergency proclamation. Chapter 46 HRS, County Organization and Administration provisions applicable to all counties, general provisions to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 76 HRS, Civil Service Law to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 89 HRS, Collective Bargaining and Public Employment to the extent that compliance with this chapter is detrimental to the expeditious and efficient execution of employment actions relating to the emergency. Hey, Nico and Squirrels, you guys, thanks for coming. You're awesome. I'm at the bottom of page 6 on the latest proclamation that was signed on Friday, the 8th of September. So I'm just going to keep going. I don't want to lose my place, and every time I talk, I lose my place. Did I read Chapter 89, HRS, Collective Bargaining and Public Employment? I think I did. Let's see. Yeah. To the extent that the compliance with this chapter is detrimental. Yeah. Okay. Chapter 89C, HRS, Public Officers and Employees Excluded from Collective Bargaining. Is that where I left off? To the extent that compliance with this chapter requires additional time detrimental to the expeditious and efficient execution of emergency actions. Chapter 91, HRS, Administrative Procedure. To the extent that any deadlines may be waived or suspended for any emergency rules that are required for the expeditious provisions of housing assistance programs, transportation, relocation assistance, supportive services of programs. Chapter 92, HRS, Public Agency Meetings and Records as follows. Section 92-3.7A, to suspend the physical location requirement for Maui-based boards. Section 92-15 for boards with Maui-based members, to suspend the quorum requirements and to the extent the absence of Maui-based members would prevent a board from meeting them. The voting requirements under Section 92.4A, executive meetings, Section 92.9B for Maui-based boards, to suspend the deadline for posting minutes, and Section 92-3.1A for limited meetings of any board related to the emergency, suspend the requirement for the board's vote and concurrence by the Office of Information Practices. Section 103-2 HRS General Fund, to the extent that compliance results in any additional delays. Section 103-53 HRS Contracts with the state or counties, tax clearances, assignments, only to the extent necessary to waive the IRS tax clearance requirement. Section 103-55 HRS, wages, hours, and working conditions of employees of contractors performing services, to the extent that compliance results in any additional delays. Chapter 103D HRS, Hawaii Public Procurement Code, to the extent that compliance results in any additional delays involved in meeting procurement requirements for selecting contractors in a timely manner to respond to emergency situations. Chapter 103F HRS, Purchases of Health and Human Services, to the extent that compliance results in any additional delays involved in meeting procurement requirements for selecting contractors in a timely manner to respond to emergency situations. Chapter 104 HRS, wages and hours of employees on public works, and implementing administrative rules to the extent that compliance with this chapter requires additional time detrimental to the expeditious and efficient execution of emergency actions. Okay, going to the top of page 8. And why does she need to pin you? That isn't this isn't that kind of channel. I don't even know what you're talking about, Nico. But thanks for being here, everybody, and especially thanks to the mods for modding. And please hit that thumbs up button to help the algorithm. So anybody that's interested in this proclamation can hear it live. And, you know, the one that I recorded earlier today, there were problems uploading it. So I'm re-recording it because I feel like it's an emergency to get this out there on record for everyone to hear, because I just don't have faith that people are going to read through it. I am completely transparent. I would not read through the entire thing. I would scan it. I would not catch most of it. So that's why I'm doing this. And I'm happy to do it for you. I feel very compelled. So I'm really happy to have support of live humans at the other end of this live broadcast. So thanks a million. Sections 105-1 to 105-10 HRS, use of government vehicles limitations to the extent that compliance with this chapter requires additional time detrimental to the expeditious and efficient execution of emergency actions. Section 127A 16A2 HRS, Major Disaster Fund, only to the extent necessary to suspend the $10 million limit on expenditures for a single emergency or disaster. Okay, money, I'm going to reread that one. Section 127A 16A2 HRS, Major Disaster Fund, only to the extent necessary to suspend the $10 million limit on expenditures for a single emergency or disaster. So they're doing away with the $10 million limit, right? Section 127A 25, which is good. I mean, they're going to need like $1 billion, I think. But anyway, 127A 25C HRS, rules and orders. To the extent the requirement to publish rules adopted pursuant to Chapter 127A HRS in a newspaper of general circulation in the state shall be suspended, inasmuch as the posting of such rules on the applicable state or county government website or by other means of official announcement as provided by this section brings the rule's content to the attention of the general public. Section 127A-30 HRS, rental or sale of essential commodities during a state of emergency, prohibition against price increases. Exceptions for the prohibition against certain price increases on the island of Maui as described in Section 2 above. The automatic statewide invocation of this provision is not needed for this emergency. Section 127A-30A2 HRS, rental or sale of essential commodities during a state of emergency, prohibition against price increases is further suspended only to the extent that it would permit the termination of any tendency for a residential dwelling unit on the island of Maui or a breach of a material term of a rental agreement or lease resulting from a failure to pay all or any portion of the rent or lease, maintenance fees, utility charges, taxes, and other fees required by the rental agreement or lease. This prohibition against certain price increases, including the prohibition against rental increases on the island of Maui, remains in full force and effect as described in Section 2 above. Additionally, Section 521-68 HRS, landlord's remedies for failure to pay rent, and section 521-71 HRS, termination of tenancy, landlord's remedies for holdover tenants, and chapter 666, one sec. Seriously, chapter 666, landlord and tenant. Not to mention, if they want to live there, they'll have to get loans. In other words, oh, I'm going to miss that one. Yeah, I said chapter 666. That's where I'm at. Like, why? Okay. Landlord and tenant are suspended to the extent necessary to prohibit the commencement, continuation, or prosecution of an action to terminate any tenancy for a residential dwelling unit on the island of Maui, for failure to pay all or any portion of the rent, maintenance fees, utility charges, taxes, or other fees required for the residential dwelling unit. Top of page 9, chapter 171, HRS, public lands, management and disposition of, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 180, HRS, soil and water conservation districts, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 180C, HRS, soil erosion and sediment control, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 183 HRS, forest reserves, water development, zoning, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 183C HRS, conservation district, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 183 DHRS, wildlife, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 184 HRS, state parks and recreation areas, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 187A HRS, aquatic resources, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 195 HRS, natural area reserve system, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. It's bad. Chapter 195 DHRS, conservation of aquatic life, wildlife, and land plants, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 200 HRS, ocean recreation and coastal areas programs, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 205 HRS, land use commission, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 205A HRS, coastal zone management, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 269 HRS, Public Utilities Commission, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency during the emergency period. Chapter 271 HRS, Motor Carrier Law, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency during the emergency period. Chapter 271G HRS, Hawaii Water Carrier Act, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency during the emergency period. Section 321-11 HRS, subjects of health rules generally, and Title 11, Chapter 22, Hawaii Administrative Rules, HAR, mortuaries, cemeteries, embalmers, undertakers, and mortuary authorities, only to the extent necessary to extend the time that a dead human body must be embalmed, cremated, or buried on the island of Maui from within 30 hours after death to the latter of 30 days after death, or 30 days after release from the custody of the coroner, medical examiner, county, or county physician. So you guys, I reposted I think it's a 9-minute video of a young man who was serving in the Navy. I think he was stationed at Bangor, Washington State, and he's 19 years old. It was on, again, on Eric West's channel, Hawaii Real Estate. in this video that I put up as, I think it's my last community post, he talks about not knowing what had happened, not hearing anything about it for the first 4 days. He was able to fly back to his hometown. He had 4 family members that were some of the first fatalities that were recorded and identified. It was his aunt and her husband, and I think their child, so his cousin, and then his cousin's kid, so his second cousin, who was only 7 years old. And they were found in the car in the driveway, just like 10 feet from the front door, all 4 of them deceased. And when he made this video with Eric West, it was a couple of weeks after that, and the family still hadn't gotten the remains of their loved ones. So I don't know why there'd be that long delay. You would think they'd be wanting to process things more quickly since they have so much of it. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. So that 30 days after release from the custody of the coroner, meaning that it might be a while before they even release. And then, okay. Chapter 328, HRS, Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics, to the extent necessary to allow a pharmacist to refill active prescriptions for persons directly impacted by the wildfire emergency if the pharmacist is unable to readily obtain refill authorization from the prescriber, and to dispense without a prescription the drug Paxlovid, and I'm not even going to try to say it, but I'll spell it, NIRMATRELVIR, co-packaged with RITONAVIR. I don't know what those are. Maybe you guys do. To persons in the county of Maui in only those instances where sufficient information is available to allow the pharmacist to assess patient renal and hepatic function and the potential for drug interaction. And it is unnecessary to modify the patient's other medications to avoid potential drug interaction, provided that 1, the pharmacist may only dispense up to the maximum 30-day supply, 5-day supply only for Paxlovid. 2, the prescription is not for a substance listed in Schedules 2-5, appearing in Chapter 329 HRS. 3, the medication is essential to the maintenance of life or to the continuation of therapy in a chronic condition. 4, in the pharmacist's professional judgment, the interruption of therapy might reasonably produce undesired health consequences or may cause physical or mental discomfort. 5, any dispensed prescription drug bears a label with the information otherwise required by law, including but not limited to Section 328-16 HRS. And 6, the dispensing pharmacist complies with Section 328-17.7 HRS and notifies the prescriber of the emergency dispensing as soon as practicable after such dispensing. Section 329-38 I1 HRS, prescriptions. To the extent necessary to waive the requirement that a prescription for controlled substances originate from within the state when prescribed to treat mental, behavioral, neurodevelopment, or substance-related or addictive disorders. Say my name for 3 times. I don't have time. I gotta get on this. Okay, I'm at the top of page 11, but thank you for being here. Section 329-40B7 HRS, methadone treatment programs, to the extent necessary to allow the medical director or other program physician of a Maui methadone treatment program to dispense the maximum number of take-home dosages of methadone permitted by federal law to patients who are directly affected by the wildfire emergency during the emergency period, in lieu of the 14-day limit. Section 329-41A8 HRS, Prohibited Acts. To the extent necessary to allow, subject to any federal regulation, a practitioner who is not physically located in the state to facilitate the issuance or distribution of a written prescription or to issue an oral prescription for a controlled substance for a patient currently in state who is directly affected by the wildfire emergency during the emergency period. Section 329-32 HRS, registration requirements. Hi, can you do my reading? I don't do readings. Like, I'm not a psychic, if that's what you're asking. Hey, Sherry. But I know that there are people who do like tarot readings online. So registration requirements: to the extent necessary to allow an out-of-state physician or advanced practice registered nurse with a current and active license and who holds a current United States Drug Enforcement Administration DEA registration in at least one state to administer, prescribe, dispense, or store a controlled substance on the island of Maui without a current Hawaii controlled substance registration, provided that they have never had their professional vocational license or their authority to work with controlled substances revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or entity or by a hospital, including related clinics and rehabilitation hospitals, nursing home, hospice, pharmacy, clinical laboratory, or other healthcare entity. This suspension is contingent on the out-of-state physician or advanced practice registered nurse receiving federal authority from the DEA to administer, prescribe, dispense, or store a controlled substance in Hawaii beforehand and complying with any further instruction from the State Narcotics Enforcement Division, NED. Chapter 342B HRS, Air Pollution, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency and implementing rules, including HAR sections 11-60, 1-52, and -53, to the extent necessary to suspend permits and to disallow open burning and agricultural burning on the islands of Hawaii and Maui. Of course, the pollution, man. Air pollution, water pollution, ground pollution. Chapters 342D HRS, Water Pollution, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency and implementing rules, including but not limited to HAR chapters 11-53, 11-54, 11-55, 11-56, and 11-62 to support emergency management functions. Chapter 342E HRS, non-point source population management and control, to the extent necessary to support emergency management functions. Chapter 342F HRS, noise pollution, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. I can't imagine the sounds of that fire when it happened on August 8th. Just horrible sounds, I'm sure. Chapter 342G HRS, Integrated Solid Waste Management, to the extent necessary to perform emergency response during the emergency period. Chapter 342H HRS, Solid Waste Pollution, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency and implementing rules, including HAR section 11-58.1, to allow expedited waste management, including but not limited to collection, removal, transport, recycling, and disposal activities. Chapter 342J HRS, Hazardous Waste, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency and implementing rules, including HAR sections 11-260.1-279.1, to allow expedited waste management, including but not limited to collection, removal, transport, recycling, and disposal activities. Chapter 342 LHRS Underground Storage Tanks and implementing rules, including HAR Section 11 280.1, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 343 HRS Environmental Impact Statements, to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 451J Marriage and Family Therapist, to the extent necessary to allow an out-of-state marriage and family therapists with current and active licenses or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 451J HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or facility or by a hospital, including related clinics and rehabilitation hospitals, nursing home, hospice, pharmacy, or clinical laboratory or other healthcare entity. Section 451J-5 HRS, Prohibited Acts, and Section 451J-7 HRS, Application for Licensure. To the extent necessary to waive the licensure and accompanying requirements so as to enable out-of-state marriage and family therapists with a current and active license to engage in telehealth practices with Hawaii patients without an in-person consultation or a prior existing provider-patient relationship, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are subject to the same conditions, limitations, or restrictions as in their home jurisdiction. Chapter 453 HRS, Medicine and Surgery, and Chapters 16-85 HAR, Medical Examiners, to the extent necessary to allow out-of-state physicians, osteopathic physicians, emergency medical service personnel, and physician assistants with a current and active license, or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 453 HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or facility or hospital, including related clinics and rehabilitation hospitals, nursing home, hospice, pharmacy, or clinical laboratory, or other healthcare entity. Section 453-1.3 HRS, Practice of Telehealth, to the extent necessary to allow individuals currently and actively licensed pursuant to Chapter 453 HRS to engage in telehealth without an in-person consultation or a prior existing physician-patient relationship, and to the extent necessary to enable out-of-state physicians, osteopathic physicians, and physicians' assistants with a current and active license, or those who were previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 453 HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to engage in telehealth in Hawaii without a license, in-person consultation, or prior existing physician-patient relationship, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are subject to the same conditions, limitations, or restrictions as in their home jurisdiction. Section 453D-5 HRS, Prohibited Acts, and 453D-7 HRS, Application for Licensure as a Mental Health Counselor, to the extent necessary to allow out-of-state licensed mental health counselors with a current and active license, or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 453D HRS but are no longer current and active, to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or facility, or by a hospital, including related clinics and rehabilitation hospitals, nursing home, hospice, pharmacy, or clinical laboratory or other healthcare entity. Section 453D-5 HRS, prohibited acts, and Section 453D-7 HRS, application for licensure as a mental health counselor, to the extent necessary to waive the licensure and accompanying requirements so as to enable out-of-state mental health counselors to engage in telehealth practices with Hawaii patients without an in-person consultation or prior existing provider-patient relationship, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are subject to the same conditions, limitations, or restrictions as in their home jurisdiction. Chapter 457 HRS Nurses and Chapter 16-89 HAR Nurses, to the extent necessary to allow out-of-state licensed practical nurses, registered nurses, advanced practice registered nurses, and advanced practice registered nurses with prescriptive authority with a current and active license, or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 457 HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or facility, or by a hospital, including related clinics and rehabilitation hospitals, nursing home, hospice, pharmacy, or clinical laboratory, or other healthcare entity. Section 461-7 HRS, temporary license. Section 461-8.5 HRS, reciprocity. Section 16-95-18 HAR, license or permit required. Section 16-95-22.5 HAR, application and requirements for pharmacist license by reciprocity, and Section 16-95-23 HAR, temporary license, to the extent necessary to allow out-of-state pharmacists to engage in the practice of pharmacy in the state and under this emergency proclamation, provided that their license is not revoked or suspended by any jurisdiction in which they hold a license, and two, they are working in a pharmacy, mobile pharmacy, in the state that shares common ownership with at least one currently licensed pharmacy in good standing in the state. Section 461-9A HRS, pharmacists in charge pharmacy personnel, and Section 16-95-79A HAR, supervision by a registered pharmacist, and 16-95-80A HAR, physical presence of a registered pharmacist, to the extent necessary to allow out-of-state pharmacists to allow out-of-state pharmacists actively licensed in another state to engage in the practice of pharmacy pursuant to Chapter 461 HRS, to receive and review prescriptions by remote data entry and counsel patients regarding the same, provided that one, their license is not revoked or suspended in any jurisdiction in which they hold a license, and two, they are working for a pharmacy, mobile pharmacy, or temporary pharmacy in the state that shares common ownership with at least one currently licensed pharmacy in good standing in the state. Section 461-14 HRS, permits for operation of pharmacy, and Section 16-95-26 HAR, pharmacy permit, to the extent necessary to establish and operate mobile or temporary pharmacies, provided that the following conditions are met. 1. The mobile or temporary pharmacy meets all applicable federal requirements. 2. The mobile or temporary pharmacy shares common ownership with at least one currently licensed pharmacy in good standing in the state. 3. The mobile or temporary pharmacy retains records of dispensing and complies with the requirements under Section 16-95-93 HAR. Records of dispensing, Section 329-36 HRS. Records of registrants, Section 329-38 HRS. Prescriptions, Section 329-41A6 HRS. Prohibited acts B penalties, Section 329-101 HRS. Reporting of dispensation of controlled substances, electronic prescription accountability system requirements penalty, and Section 23-200-12 HAR. Records of controlled substances. 4. The mobile or temporary pharmacy is under the control and management of a licensed pharmacist who is on the premises while prescriptions are being dispensed. 5. Reasonable security measures are taken to safeguard the drug supply maintained in the mobile or temporary pharmacy and pursuant to Section 23-200-11 HAR. Inspections of establishments of registrants. And finally, 6, the mobile or temporary pharmacy ceases the provision of services within 48 hours following the termination of the declared emergency. That makes sense. Section 461-15(7) HRS miscellaneous permits, and Section 16-95-18 HAR license or permit required, and Section 16-95-31 HAR miscellaneous permit to the extent necessary to allow an out-of-state pharmacy or entity to engage in the practice of pharmacy by distributing, shipping, mailing, or delivering prescription drugs or devices to or on the island of Maui, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended by any jurisdiction in which they hold a license. Top of page 16. Section 463-10.5 HRS. Guards, registration, instruction, training, testing, and continuing education required, renewal of registration, to the extent necessary, to allow out-of-state licensed guards with a current and active license or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 463 HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to engage in the business of guarding statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended, have not been convicted of a felony within the last 5 years, and are hired by a Hawaii licensed guard agency whose license is current, active, and in good standing. I said it earlier and I'll say it again, concerning that if they had a felony over 5 years ago, then that's okay. That's concerning. Section 464.4 HRS, Public Works required to be supervised by certain professionals to the extent necessary to respond to the emergency. Chapter 465 HRS, Psychologists, and Chapter 16-98 HAR, Psychologists, to the extent necessary to allow out-of-state psychologists with a current and active license or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 465 HRS, but who are no longer current and active to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or facility, or by a hospital, including related clinics and rehabilitation hospitals, nursing homes, hospice, pharmacy, clinical laboratory, or other health care entity. Hey, Sunset Salty Sage, what up? Y'all all and your fancy wrenches. I see you. Oh, you're so funny. Okay. Section 465-2 HRS license required, and Section 465-15 HRS prohibited acts penalties to the extent necessary to waive the licensure and accompanying requirements so as to enable out-of-state psychologists licensed to engage in telehealth practices with Hawaii patients without an in-person consultation or a prior existing provider-patient relationship, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are subject to the same conditions, limitations, or restrictions as in their home jurisdiction. Chapter 466D, respiratory therapists, to the extent necessary to allow an out-of-state respiratory therapist with a current and active license or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 466D HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or facility or by a hospital, including related clinics and rehabilitation hospitals, nursing home, hospice, pharmacy, or clinical laboratory or other health care entity. Page 17, top of the page. Section 466J-4 HRS license required. Section 466J-5 HRS radiographers, radiation therapists, and nuclear medicine technologists qualifications and licenses. Section 11-44-3 HAR licenses required. Section 11-44-4 HAR application for license, and Section 11-44-5 HAR minimum eligibility requirements for license to the extent necessary to allow an out-of-state radiographer, radiation therapist, or nuclear medicine technologist with a current and active registration or certification in good standing with the American Registry of Radiologic Technologists, ARRT, in radiography, radiation therapy technology, or nuclear medicine technology, or with the Nuclear Medicine Technology Certification Board, NMTCB, in nuclear medicine technology, or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 466J HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or other healthcare entity that possesses a current and valid radiation facility license. Facilities are required to submit to the Radiologic Technology Board the following information for individuals performing radiologic technology under this exemption: full name, ARRT, NMTCB, or previous license number, and a photocopy of the current ARRT or NMTCB credential card. Chapter 467E, social workers, to the extent necessary to allow an out-of-state clinical social worker with a current and active license or those previously licensed pursuant to Chapter 467E HRS, but who are no longer current and active, to practice statewide without a Hawaii license, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are hired by a state or county agency or facility or by a hospital, including related clinics, rehabilitation hospitals, nursing home, hospice, pharmacy, or clinical laboratory, or other health care entity. Section 467E-5 HRS. Who's awake? I mean, this actually fascinates me. I know that sounds silly. But it's, I think, super important for attention to be paid to what's going on over there with the laws.
in Hawaii, in Maui. So section 467 E-5 HRS license required, and section 467E-13 HRS prohibited acts penalties to the extent necessary to waive the licensure and accompanying requirements so as to enable out-of-state social workers to engage in telehealth practices with Hawaii patients without an in-person consultation or a prior existing provider-patient relationship, provided that they have never had their license revoked or suspended and are subject to the same conditions, limitations, or restrictions as in their home jurisdiction. Section 572 6A, application license limitations, to the extent necessary to allow a person applying for a marriage license on the island of Maui to appear via video conferencing. Section 16 95 26B1 HAR, pharmacy permit, to the extent necessary to reopen existing pharmacy locations in areas impacted by the wildfire emergency without a sink with hot and cold water and sewage outlet, provided that one, reasonable alternative sources for water and sanitation are established, and two, all other requirements under section 16 95 26 are met. Excuse me while I stay hydrated. 16 Section 1695 84 HAR, transfer of prescriptions, to the extent necessary to allow a pharmacy or pharmacist whose principal place of business or professional practice is directly impacted by wildfire on the island of Maui to transfer prescriptive information for the purpose of initial fill or refill dispensing. Section 23 200 10 HAR, only to the extent necessary to one, allow registrants whose principal place of business or professional practice is directly impacted by wildfire to relocate controlled substances to another healthcare facility so long as the registrant inventories the relocated substances, segregates the stock of controlled substances, and keeps the substances secure. And two, allow licensed Hawaii registrants who may respond to the emergency on the islands of Hawaii or Maui from another island to prescribe, administer, dispense, or store a controlled substance without the need for a separate controlled substance registration. This suspension is conditioned on the registrant informing the state NED beforehand and complying with any further instruction from NED. For severability, if any provision of this proclamation is rendered or declared illegal for any reason, or shall be invalid or unenforceable, such provision shall be modified or deleted, and the remainder of this proclamation and the application of such provision to other persons or circumstances shall not be affected thereby, but shall be enforced to the greatest extent permitted by applicable law. 5. Enforcement. No provision of this proclamation or any rule or regulation hereunder shall be construed as authorizing any private right of action to enforce any requirement of this proclamation or of any rule or regulation, unless the governor, director of emergency management, and their designee issues an express order to a non-judicial public officer. No provision of this proclamation or any rule or regulation hereunder shall be construed as imposing any ministerial. Did I stumble over that before? I think I did. Ministerial. My mouth just won't do it. I know the word. You guys know the word. Um, Imposing any ministerial duty upon any non-judicial public officer, and shall not bind the officer to any specific course of action or planning in response to the emergency or interfere with the officer's authority to utilize his or her discretion I further declare that this proclamation supersedes the August 19th, 2023 sixth proclamation relating to wildfires. This disaster emergency relief period shall commence immediately and continue through November 6th, 2023, unless terminated or superseded by separate proclamation, whichever shall occur first. Notwithstanding the termination of a disaster emergency relief period, any contracts, agreements, procurements, programs, or employment of personnel entered into, started, amended, or continued by reason of the provisions of the proclamation relating to this emergency shall continue in full force and effect. Done this 8th day of September 2023, Josh Green, MD, Governor of Hawaii, and approved by Ann E. Lopez, Attorney General, State of Hawaii. So, rules relating, it's almost over. We're almost done. Rules relating to immunities for healthcare practices. 1, purpose and authority. 2, definitions. 3, healthcare response to emergency. 4, immunity of healthcare facilities. 5, immunity of healthcare professionals. 6, immunity of healthcare volunteers. 7, miscellaneous. This part actually has me a little bit worried. 1, purpose and authority. These rules are adopted pursuant to sections 127A-9, 12, 13, 25, 29, and 31 HRS to respond to this wildfire emergency and have the full force and effect. Rules are necessary to enable the healthcare system in Hawaii to continue to function at acceptable levels of service for patients during a time, where did that go? During a time when healthcare professionals are in short supply. 2, definitions. For the purpose of these rules, the following definitions apply. Healthcare facility means any program, institution, site, whether fixed or mobile, building or agency, or portion thereof, private or public, other than federal facilities or services, whether organized for profit or not, used, operated, or designed to provide medical diagnosis, treatment, nursing, rehabilitative, or preventative care to any person or persons. The term includes but is not limited to facilities licensed or certified by DOH pursuant to section 321-1110 HRS and others providing similarly organized services regardless of nomenclature, and any state government operated site providing healthcare services established for the purpose of responding to this wildfire emergency. What if it wasn't a wildfire? Just saying. Healthcare professional means marriage and family therapist licensed pursuant to Chapter 451J, physicians and surgeons and other licensed pursuant to Chapter 453, mental health counselors licensed pursuant to Chapter 453D, psychologists licensed pursuant to Chapter 465, nurses licensed pursuant to Chapter 457, respiratory therapists licensed pursuant to Chapter 466D, radiographers, radiation therapists, and nuclear medicine technologists licensed pursuant to Chapter 466J. Social workers licensed pursuant to Chapter 467E, and pharmacists licensed pursuant to Chapter 461 who one, I guess, but it's like a lowercase I, are providing healthcare services at a healthcare facility in response to this wildfire emergency and are authorized to do so. Or 2, it's 2 lowercase i's, are working under the direction of the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, HIEMA, or Hawaii Department of Health, HDOH, pursuant to any governor's emergency proclamation or executive order related to this emergency. Collective emergency proclamations. I'm going to take a drink. Are you guys still kicking? Healthcare volunteer means all volunteers or medical, nursing, social work, pharmacy, or respiratory therapist students who do not have licensure who, one, are providing services, assistance, or support at a healthcare facility in response to the wildfire emergency and are authorized to do so, or two, are working under the direction of HIEMA or HDOH, pursuant to the governor's emergency proclamations. Section 3, Healthcare Response to Wildfire Emergency. Healthcare facilities, healthcare professionals, and healthcare volunteers shall render assistance in support of the state's response to the wildfire emergency. For healthcare facilities, rendering assistance in support of the state's response includes canceling or postponing elective surgeries and procedures, as each facility determines to be appropriate under the circumstances presented by the wildfire emergency. If elective surgeries or procedures are performed at the healthcare facility, in addition, for healthcare facilities, rendering assistance in support of the state's response must include measures such as increasing the number of beds, preserving personal protective equipment, or taking necessary steps to prepare to treat patients in need of care because of the emergency. For healthcare professionals, rendering assistance in support of the state's response means providing healthcare services at a healthcare facility in response to the wildfire emergency, or working under the direction of HIEMA or HDOH pursuant to the governor's emergency proclamation. For health care volunteers, rendering assistance in support of the state's response means providing services, assistance, or support at a healthcare facility in response to the wildfire emergency, or working under the direction of HIEMA or HDOH pursuant to the emergency proclamations. Section 4, Immunity of Healthcare Facilities. Healthcare facilities that in good faith comply completely with all state and federal orders regarding this emergency shall be immune from civil liability for any death or injury to persons or property damage alleged to have been caused by any act or omission by the healthcare facility, which death of or injury to persons or property damage occurred at a time when the healthcare facility was rendering assistance to the state by providing health care services in response to the wildfire emergency, unless it is established that such death or injury to persons or property damage was caused by willful misconduct, gross negligence, or recklessness of the healthcare facility. It sounds so scary to be in a health crisis there right now, huh? And I'm sure a lot of people are. Section 5, Immunity of Healthcare Professionals. Healthcare professionals who in good faith comply completely with all state and federal orders regarding the wildlife emergency shall be immune from civil liability for any death or injury to persons or property damage alleged to have been caused by any act or omission by the healthcare professional, which death of or injury to persons or property damage occurred at a time when the healthcare professional was rendering assistance to the state by providing healthcare services in response to the wildfire emergency, unless it is established that such death or injury to persons or property damage was caused by willful misconduct, gross negligence, or recklessness of the healthcare professional. Section 6, immunity of healthcare volunteers. Any healthcare volunteer who in good faith complies completely with all state and federal orders regarding the wildfire emergency shall be immune from civil liability for any death of or injury to persons or property damaged alleged to have been caused by any act or omission by the healthcare volunteer at a time when the healthcare volunteer was rendering assistance to the state by providing services, assistance, or support in response to the wildfire emergency, unless it is established that such death of or injury to persons or property damage was caused by the willful misconduct, gross negligence, or recklessness of the healthcare volunteer. I think it's interesting. I hope you guys do too. Miscellaneous. A, nothing in the, it's section 7, miscellaneous. A, nothing in these rules shall be construed to preempt or limit any applicable immunity from civil liability available to any healthcare facility, healthcare professional, or healthcare volunteer. B, if any provision of these rules is held invalid by any court of competent jurisdiction, this invalidity does not affect any other provision which can be given effect without the invalid provision or application. To achieve this purpose, the provisions of this rule are declared to be severable. And C, the provisions of these rules shall take effect nunc pro tunc to August 8th, 2023, and shall remain in effect for the emergency period unless terminated by separate proclamation, whichever shall occur first. So we are just about 90 minutes. That's pretty much what it was when I read it earlier. Hopefully this one stays uploaded because I don't think I can get through it again, at least not today. I have to rest my voice. And so I thank you guys for being here. I just feel like it's so important to keep attention on Hawaii and what's going on over there in Maui with these wildfires, as they call them. I'm extremely suspicious of the wildfires, as I'm sure many of you guys are too. In some sense, it almost doesn't matter what caused the fires. We had epic failure after epic failure after epic failure that resulted in a mass casualty event. There is so much secrecy about how many people are deceased. There's so much secrecy about basically everything. There's no news coverage. There's no reporters are harassed and people aren't being allowed into their own property. People can't even see their own property. It's barricaded off. There's a lot of great channels right now that are covering Maui, and I'm going to put some of them in my description so that if you guys are not familiar, you can find them there. It's just unbelievable. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your Monday. Again, prayers for all of the people in Maui and all over the world in all of these disasters and crises. Here we are on September 11th, and it's just mind-boggling. Praying for all of these people, I think, is one of the most powerful things we can do for ourselves and for the world. Meditation and prayer are essential to good health, in my humble opinion. Take really good care of yourself. Make sure you're drinking your water, getting good nutrition, high protein, fruits and veggies, and get your exercise and your rest and your relaxation. Sending you light, sending you love. Peace out. See you on the next one. Thank you kindly for being here, and see if I can turn this off. All right. Thanks again.